Hi Reddit, I'm in a tough spot right now, and I could really use some advice. My fiancée, let's call her Karen, 32F, and I, 31M, were supposed to get married in a little over 6 months. We had everything planned. The venue, the theme, even the cake tastings were done. But it all started to unravel when we began talking about the guest list. Karen had been making subtle comments for a while about not wanting my younger brother, Chad, 26M, at the wedding. At first, I didn't take her too seriously, assuming it was just a small concern, maybe about logistics or seating arrangements. But she wouldn't give me a real explanation. Every time I asked, she dodged the question or brushed it off with vague excuses. Still, I told her repeatedly that my brother's presence was absolutely non-negotiable. Let me give you some background here. Chad and I have always been incredibly close. Growing up, our parents weren't abusive, but they weren't exactly ideal role models either. They were more focused on their own lives and often left us to fend for ourselves. When we were little, they'd frequently drop us off at our grandma's house so they could go out and party. By the time I was old enough to watch over Chad, they left the responsibility of the household and essentially raising my brother on me. While this kind of neglect could have driven a wedge between us, it had the opposite effect. Chad and I became inseparable. He's not just my little brother, he's my best friend, my confidant, my ride or die. If I had to list the most important people in my life, it would be him and my future kids. I'd take a bullet for him without a second thought. So, to say his presence at my wedding was a must is putting it lightly. It wasn't just non-negotiable, it was essential. Fast forward to a few days ago. The topic of the guest list came up again, and Karen reiterated that she didn't want Chad at the wedding. I was already on edge, but this time, I couldn't let it slide. I told her flat out that there would be no wedding at all if Chad wasn't there. I demanded to know why she was so insistent on excluding him. That's when she dropped the bombshell. She looked me dead in the eye and said she didn't want a faggot at her wedding and that her family didn't approve of his lifestyle. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, I knew Karen wasn't the most progressive person in the world, but I never imagined her hatred ran this deep. My brother is one of the kindest, most genuine people you'll ever meet. To hear someone I thought I loved speak about him like that, especially knowing how much he means to me, was like a punch to the gut. For context, Chad came out as bisexual when he was 20. I remember how scared he was to tell me. He sat me down, visibly shaking, and stammered through his confession. I hugged him and told him I loved him no matter what. From that moment on, I made a silent vow to protect him from anyone who would try to hurt him or make him feel less than he is. Hearing Karen's words brought all of that back. There was no way I could let her disrespect him like that, not on my watch. Something in me snapped. I told Karen we were done, that this relationship was over. She tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I demanded she give me back the engagement ring. She hesitated, but eventually handed it over. Then I told her she had 10 minutes to pack her things and leave my house, or I'd call the cops. She left in tears, but I didn't feel even a shred of guilt. After she left, I started canceling everything. The venue, the caterers, the DJ. I wasn't about to marry someone who held such hateful views, and I certainly wasn't going to hide the reason why. When people asked why the wedding was called off, I told them the truth. Karen didn't want my brother at the wedding because he's bisexual. Word spread quickly, and the backlash against her was swift. Chad, of course, heard about the whole mess. He called me, apologizing for causing any trouble. That broke my heart. He even said he'd skip the wedding if it meant I could still be happy. But I told him there was no way I'd ever go through with a wedding where he wasn't welcome. The happiest day of my life wouldn't be happy at all if he wasn't there. Meanwhile, Karen has been facing the consequences of her actions. Some of our mutual friends have distanced themselves from her, and I've been bombarded with hateful messages from her family. I blocked them all after the first few. Karen herself has been reaching out too, alternating between guilt-tripping me and crying about how I ruined her life. She claims I destroyed our 4-year relationship over just a word. But here's the thing. Not once, not a single time, has she apologized for what she said about Chad. That tells me everything I need to know. Chad, on the other hand, has been nothing but supportive. He keeps telling me I don't need to defend him, but he doesn't understand. This isn't just about him. It's about me too. I can't build a life with someone who harbors so much hate. And honestly, I think Karen deserves every bit of the backlash she's getting. Her true colors are out in the open now, and I'm glad. It's better to find out now than after we were married. I know some people might think I overreacted or that I'm the asshole for canceling everything, but I don't see it that way. Karen has to face the consequences of her hatred. And frankly, it's refreshing to see people holding her accountable. Who even says that kind of thing in Seattle, of all places? So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Maybe I'm the asshole, but I honestly don't think so. I'd rather be single forever than marry someone who can't accept my brother for who he is. Chad deserves better, and so do I. AITA for removing my son, daughter-in-law, and grandson from my $500,000 will because my son slapped me. I'm a 64-year-old who likes to stay fit and loves riding motorcycles. This passion of mine has always been a way to stay connected to my adventurous side. I take pride in maintaining my bike and ensuring all safety measures are followed every time I ride. Unfortunately, this year, what should have been a joyful experience turned into a family nightmare that still haunts me. The incident happened in January. My son, his wife, and my 11-year-old grandson were visiting me for a weekend. My grandson is curious and full of energy, and he was particularly fascinated by my motorcycle. He'd always asked about it during their visits, and this time, he wanted to go for a ride. Since it was a short visit, I decided to make the time for him. Before we headed out, I made sure he wore all the proper safety gear, a helmet, gloves, boots, and knee pads that I'd bought specifically for him. We didn't plan a long trip, just a quick ride to the ice cream shop and back, a total of maybe 15 minutes. It was supposed to be a simple, fun experience. However, on our way back, we were rear-ended by a reckless driver. The impact was sudden and terrifying. I was thrown off balance but managed to avoid injury. My grandson wasn't as lucky. He broke his arm in the accident. Watching him cry in pain while I tried to comfort him was one of the most gut-wrenching moments of my life. In the chaos, I made a quick decision to prioritize my grandson over confronting the driver. I flagged down help, got my grandson to the hospital, and made sure the police were called. Thankfully, the driver was later arrested for reckless driving. At the hospital, my son and daughter-in-law rushed in, understandably frantic. They went straight to my grandson, hardly acknowledging me. While I was relieved to see them focusing on him, I also felt an ache in my chest when they avoided looking at me entirely. Later that evening, when we returned home, I approached my son to try and explain what had happened. Instead of a conversation, I was met with anger. My son slapped me across the face and screamed that they were never coming back. I was stunned and hurt beyond words. I chalked it up to distress and believed he'd come around once he had time to calm down. Over the following months, I sent countless letters of apology and tried to reach out to them. Every attempt was met with silence. I truly wanted to mend our relationship, especially for my grandson's sake. But my efforts seemed futile. Then, on November 3rd, my grandson's birthday, I decided to send him a gift, a Lego set I knew he'd love. A few days later, I received a call from my son. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought we were finally turning a corner. He told me my grandson wanted to talk to me, and I eagerly answered the phone. Instead of a happy conversation, my grandson's voice came through the line, cold and hurtful. He said he hated me and told me to go F off, old man. I felt my heart shatter into pieces. I had no words. A week later, I received the Lego set back in the mail. It was smashed to pieces, accompanied by a note that read, "If you try to contact us again, you'll meet the same fate as the Legos. We're going no contact." That was the breaking point for me. Something inside me snapped. If they wanted no contact, I'd give them no contact, permanently. I decided to update my will. I removed my son, daughter-in-law, and grandson entirely. My new will states that all my savings, assets, and life insurance, amounting to $400,000 to $500,000, will go to charities supporting old age homes and orphanages. I did leave $50,000 in a trust for my grandson's future college expenses, but he'll only receive it when he turns 21, and only under specific conditions. I had my lawyer draft the new will, ensuring every detail was airtight. I signed it in the presence of witnesses, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. If my family didn't value me, I'd make sure my life's work went towards something meaningful. Recently, however, it seems word of my updated will somehow got out. My daughter-in-law called me, furious, accusing me of punishing them for something that was my fault. She claimed the accident was entirely on me and said they'd reconsider allowing supervised visits with my grandson if I wanted a relationship with him. Her words only solidified my decision. I told her I'm old, not a fool, and reminded her that they were the ones who chose to cut me out of their lives. I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with them anymore and ended the call by blocking her number. Since then, my son and grandson have both tried calling me repeatedly, but I haven't answered. I refuse to let them manipulate me or my feelings any longer. If they cared, they wouldn't have treated me this way in the first place. I genuinely wanted a relationship with my grandson. I had envisioned being a positive influence in his life, sharing experiences, and creating memories. But I can't spend my twilight years groveling for scraps of their approval. I'm done. Now I find myself at a crossroads, seeking clarity and advice. Was I wrong to change my will? Am I overreacting, or am I finally standing up for myself? Edits. 1. Attorney-client confidentiality. I did question how the will details might have leaked. After calling my lawyer repeatedly, he assured me he didn't disclose anything. He suggested one of the witnesses might have mentioned something. I've scheduled a meeting with him tomorrow to discuss this further. 2. About the bike ride. My son and daughter-in-law were fully aware and gave permission. The ride wasn't long, about 5 minutes to an ice cream shop and 10 minutes back through an alternate route. My grandson wore all the safety gear I'd bought for him, including a helmet, gloves, boots, and knee pads. 3. My late wife's profession. Although my wife was a lawyer, she wasn't a practicing attorney. She only took on a few cases in her career and never pursued law seriously, which is why I'm still learning about these legal issues on my own.